Okay, so thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning, and thank you very much to Francis Meek and to Sue Lawton for inviting us to come along and give the presentation. So our presentation is about a research project that myself and Lindsay did together. I'm a senior lecturer in marketing at the University of Birmingham in the business school there, and Lindsay is a senior lecturer at the University of York in the management department. And together we conducted a research project on school gardening, and that's what we've been asked to talk to you about today. Okay, so before I talk in detail about our project, I wanted to give a bit more detail into the background of our study, what made us interested in the topic in the first place and how we got there. So, of course, as academics, we are reading the literature. So, as reading the literature, these were the kind of messages that were coming across to us as we were looking and exploring the area of food. I mentioned that I'm a lecturer in marketing and consumption, and I'm particularly interested in the area of food consumption. And as you read around the literature, there's some key messages coming out about the food environment and how it's changed in recent times. First of all, there's a message about the heavy levels of industrialisation of the food production market over the last century. Since the Industrial Revolution, food has changed immeasurably in how it reaches us. There's been seen changes in the way it's produced, delivered, controlled, etc. And so it's changed the way we grow food, the way animals are reared, and it's moved very much from a local to a global type of market. And the result of that has been that it's changed a market that has become dominated by major food suppliers. So the control of the food supply chain has moved from a very broad and widespread to controlled by just a few major players on the global stage. Now, the result of that in terms of consumers has been that we've become a high degree of disconnection between producers and consumers. The consumers moved further and further away from the origin of food, and as the polls that we've been talking about this morning have indicated, knowing where food comes from has become increasingly difficult as consumers find themselves, separated from the conditions in which food's produced. Not only are we becoming separated, but it's also becoming highly decontextualised. So what I mean by that is when we consume the food, we know little about the conditions in which it was produced. We can consume many types of food irrelevant of the seasonality. Seasonality has ceased to become important. We can eat exotic fruits all year round. They can come to us from wherever they can be sourced, they can be flown into us. So we lose that context of food and production. We can have it at any time through those imports. And as we go into retail environments, we see that food is increasingly decontextualised because it reaches in its kind of almost final or finished form. We are not seeing it in its raw or natural state, and there's little sign of the dirt or the mess involved with food production or any process it might have been through. We don't see that. We just see the finished form. So Peter Jackson talks about this as resulting in a kind of anxieties around our food choices, that consumers are anxious about the choices they have to make, both in terms of food choice, but also concerns about health, nutrition, the kind of topics we've been talking about this morning, the environmental impact of our food choices, and also the conditions of production as well. Now, if we move this sort of specifically into a context in relating to children all these things have been affecting those too. This kind of obfuscation between production and consumption, no clear connections anymore. But on top of this, children are increasingly becoming a target for food marketers. The market for children's food is a growing and attractive one for organisations, and so they are in a position where they market heavily, and not only do they target their marketing messages, but they develop products specifically to target at this particular group. And so we've ended up with what Coakley in her work refers to as virtual food. And this is food which is become indistinguishable or unrecognisable from the form at which it started out. She talks it as not being reflective of what its content is. So food products for children are being reconstructed and reconstituted at an ever increasing pace. pace such that if I just hang on, if I do my slideshow, maybe that makes it. Yeah, that's better. So it's an ever-increasing pace such that it's unrecognisable to identify where the food has come from, what it was originally. She talks about it, the key ingredient fading into memory. So we see it as an attractive sector, and the objective of organisations then becomes about producing food that is attractive and marketable to consumers, to child consumers, but bears little resemblance to the original ingredients. And in this situation, I'm talking about things like chicken nuggets, the infamous turkey Twizzlers, cheese strings, etc. So school food is becoming less recognisable from its constituent ingredients. But what other trends are we seeing in relation to childhood more broadly? Well, Louise Davis there was talking about rising levels of obesity, and particularly childhood obesity. Figures from the House of Commons Library for just this year, the most recent 2021, indicate those levels are high and increasing. So amongst 4 to 5 year olds, almost 10% of children are obese, and a further 13% are overweight. So at that age. If we move on to 9 to 10 year olds, 20% of children are obese, and a further 14% or so are overweight. So this is an increasingly a kind of health problem that's more pervasive in society. Another trend that we identified from the literature was the increasingly sedentary lifestyle, perhaps of all of us, but particularly amongst children. And in the literature, there's authors that talk about the bubble wrap generation, a generation who aren't free to roam and play in the outdoor environment, often through concerns about safety. And so this prevention of them going outside and exploring is resulting in a more indoor lifestyle, where they're sedentary, based around screens, all aspects that I suspect may be exacerbated during the pandemic and the need to stay inside. So that's the situation around children's environments, and particularly in relation to food. And as we were reading this literature, at around the same time, ASDA published some research that they'd undertaken, looking at what children understood in terms of where food came from. And they surveyed children under 8, and they found that more than half didn't know that eggs came from chickens. 6 out of 10 didn't know how long it takes to grow a vegetable, and 1 in 10 didn't know where beef comes from. And given those points that I've just been talking about, it's perhaps not surprising that children have this gap between understanding where food comes from and connecting it to the food they eat every day and that's put on the plate in front of them. All this paints a picture of a generation where we are becoming increasingly distanced and dislocated from food production, knowing where it comes from and how it gets to us. They are being heavily targeted by marketers and being branded, playful, fun messages attached with branded types of food. And they're unable to explore the outside in the same way that previous generations have been, what Louvre refers to as the nature deficit syndrome. So they're not able to explore and engage in those kind of ways. So Lindsay and I wanted to explore ways in which we could bring children into contact with food production, and the setting we chose was that of the school garden, and we set up a research project around this basis. So as I said, our research project then was based in school gardens. These were primary schools, so I know a number of you here, as I've been watching the discussion this morning, are from secondary schools, but hopefully some points will come out which are also relevant to you. But we worked with 2 primary schools, one in a more rural setting and one in a town setting, and worked with them on their gardening activities, encouraged them to undertake them, and we took part as participant observers. So we were largely observing what went on. So we were, in terms of researchers, we were recording these through field notes, making a note of the discussions that take place, the activities, the reactions of all the participants. But we also did some interviews as well. Some of those interviews took place as we were taking part, because we did take part alongside the children as a way of creating a more comfortable environment for them. So we did some interviews, but these were only short, but as you'll see when I talk about it for a moment, they gave us some useful data. And in terms of the activities, these activities included things that you would expect with food growing, like digging and planting, picking, etc. But they also included play and discovery, which was a lovely part of this. It included pulling up a plant and looking at the roots and fiddling around with them and playing with them. These activities weren't always structured, so they weren't always focused on the end goal of producing food. They were focused very much on discovery, often unplanned activities taking place. And these school gardens then, for all these reasons, offered an environment that's very opposite of that kind of virtual food environment where food is kind of constructed in a industrial process and is unrecognisable. It overcomes that clean, sanitised image, that ready-made image that we see in retail environments. And we found that the children really love these unstructured activities. They love them in and of themselves. They enjoyed the digging and the engaging with the materials, the mud, the roots, the creatures, etc. that they found. They really enjoyed it. They told people how much they enjoyed it. They would shout out, "Yeah, it's the muddy bit," when they came and were digging and playing with the mud. And one child at one point said, "I just really like the feel of mud." So that sensory engagement was really coming out in these activities. The children had the kind of equipment you might expect for gardening. They had little gloves and spades, etc. But often these were just discarded in favour of kind of scurrying around in the earth with their hands. They showed us their muddy hands. They talked about how much they love getting muddy. But noticeably, they did identify that actually maybe everyone wouldn't be quite happy about them getting muddy. Maybe their parents or their teachers might frown on this a little bit. But one girl commented, "Oh, my uniform's muddy, my hands are muddy, but it's okay, my mum won't mind because I've got it because of gardening." So I've talked a bit about the engagement there, the kind of activities. The connections with food were made very much in feeling proud of what had been achieved. They saw the harvesting of food as almost like a treasure hunt. They saw them as trophies. And that was, I think, really nicely summed up in this kind of description here about the potato harvest. So these are taken from the field notes of the project, but it talks away the children were manically tearing at the soil. They were trying to get as many potatoes as possible, and each time they found them, there was a real sense of excitement, literally screaming with pleasure. And such was the excitement generated that people, teachers in the car park, the team that were playing football on the time, the after-school football club, came over to see what was happening. And so it was a real focus on the activity, a real sharing of the excitement and the fun, and really being excited about what had been gained. You know, they talked about what they would do with the potatoes when they got home, how they would eat them. A similar kind of trophy effect was found with the radishes, and radishes are often unpalatable to young eaters. You know, they would try them when they were in the garden and they often spit them out because they were just too peppery for them, but they enjoyed picking them and taking them home. Often the radishes have been left into the ground far too long and become quite big and woody, but when they pulled them out, they'd say things like, "Wow, this is great, I'm going to show it to my mum." And when they took the radishes back into the classroom, which they did, they carried them held aloft over their head, you know, really walking in triumphant at what they had achieved. So we definitely saw evidence of those connections to food practices being made. If the context is that disconnection between consumption and production, then certainly in the garden with these food practices, we saw them making them. Sometimes it was through their own actions, sometimes it was through observing the actions of others. So one young child, aged 5, said, "Oh, I saw the school cook coming here and picking something." And the school cook had been going out and getting ingredients. He thought she was picking grass. Actually, it was chives they were picking. But actually, they were seeing them using these produce. Picking and eating the produce became a focus of the sessions. They would often start by saying, "What can we pick next? What can we try today?" They would try eating produce straight from the ground or straight off the plants. For example, broad beans was one of the crops that they were able to eat. They started off kind of carefully opening the pods and tentatively trying the beans, but loved them, and then were ripping the pods open and kept coming back for more and devouring them. So really enjoying what they were able to consume. And they started to see those connections between growing and eating, seeing growing and eating as connected and complementary. And brother, this lovely quote here where the girl says, "My granddad doesn't seem to like gardening." And I said to him, "Well, maybe if you don't like gardening, why do you like broccoli? Why do you have potatoes?" Because they are all made from gardening. So then I'm just going to give you an insight then to some of our activities and our findings. But essentially our findings came down to this real importance of the sensory when it comes to learning about food and eating. Sensory experience is important for children. One of them said to us, "I hate cauliflower. I don't think it tastes of anything. And it's white. I hate the colour white. It's just plain." And that to me talks volumes about the importance of the sensory when it comes to that food experience. And gardens are a place which are rich in sensory experiences. They can encounter, eat, learn about, produce, get their fingers dirty. They can play with the contents and the products of production, the elements connected with production. They can play with soil and plants, discover and touch animals, and all in a really fun and engaging way. And that this sensory experience will give them the kind of awareness to navigate to navigate their food choices in an environment which is full of virtual food and marketing messages. It gives them a kind of experiences to draw on, a chance to experience and be with food rather than just know about food. And it's a place where they can actively engage with all those kind of things that are usually not associated with food. Food is often presented, as I said, sanitised and clean, and here is food in dirt and mess and fun and disorder. But all that ways make it more exciting and appealing. Just as I come on to our final slide then, although we looked at the school garden, that was our focus of our research, we didn't cover other food production contexts, but you can easily see how this engagement with the sensory elements of food production, bringing that in, could be applied to a wider range of contexts. So getting engaged with different materials, clean ones, dirty ones, could all be seen in, for example, farm visits or visits to places with small holdings or places with small groups of animals which will grow or produce different types of food groups. The aim here would be about offering those possibilities that were available in the school garden: interaction, questioning, ownership, a place to form connections. All those connections and conditions that were possible in that school garden would also be similar in these environments. And the aim would be about generating fun, generating interaction, and all that leading to learning as a potential future or a current consumer of food. So I've made a list of different references here that would be useful if any of you want to follow any of that up. And now I believe Hayden's going to talk about some examples of similar kind of work that he's been doing in his primary school. Is that correct?
Let's just get this on. So yeah, my name's Hayden Bettles. I'm head of food and outdoor and allotment lead at a primary school in Manchester. I sit on the B&F advisory groups for both teaching food in England and at primary schools. I was recently voted Healthy Schools Coordinator of the year 2021, and also I'm ambassador for Love British Food. We're very fortunate where we are. We have a nice allotment area. We've got 18 raised beds. We have a 4-metre polytunnel. We have an orchard, which we planted last year, which has got about 20 trees, and we're looking at developing more trees this year, 20 fruit trees. And we've also got the hydroponic growing. Now, I know what some of you are all saying, well, we don't have the space. Well, that leads me on to the next slide, which is, what happens if we don't have the space? Well, we can still grow in schools. You don't need all these 18 raised bed allotments. You don't need the 4-metre polytunnel. You don't need all the jazz. We've all got a fence. We've all got a wall. And something you can see in that top left-hand corner is us growing up the fence. So we're just using a bit of gutter in there, a bit of soil, and we've got some tomato plants in there. We've also got some alpine strawberries going in. So we're growing in different environments. We can take these maybe on the school wall. We can Every school has got a fence. You can put these on the fence. It doesn't have to be in one specific area. You can grow in bags. So when we get all our potatoes, we don't put the potatoes in the ground at all. We grow them in bags because we find it's easier for us. Or you can maybe look at microgreens. We do a lot of microgreens when we're garnishing dishes, what we're cooking in school. So we use a lot of microgreens, and still you're still growing. It's really important to remember that with getting children outside, we're giving them that connection with food, and we're giving them hands-on learning experiences, that real connection. And we've all got a story where, we've got a child who said, do you know where a carrot comes from? And I asked a child the other day, do you know where a carrot comes from? Year 2 child, and he said, a rabbit. And we've all had that experience where they've said something bizarre, and then I looked and I thought about the child, and then I realised, well, that child has missed so much from COVID. They've not been able to go out in the allotment. They've not been able to go on the farm visits, what we normally run. So therefore, they've not been exposed to that food. They've not been exposed to where it grows and seeing that real life situation. So it's really important that we're giving them that exposure. We've also got our hydroponic system. So we know children get bored. So one of the questions on the research was vegetables to grow. I presume most adults wouldn't know kind of how long vegetables grow as well, never mind children. So that's something to think about as well. But we've got these hydroponics where we can have lettuce ready in 4 to 6 weeks. It's a great cross-curricular tool, so you can see at the bottom we're growing wheat there. We did a year-long experiment with a farmer where he was growing wheat in his field and we was growing wheat in our hydroponics, and the children were measuring each day. We were comparing with the farmer, and then after a year we measured the height. We saw how many ears of grain was there, so we was comparing that way. And with this machine we can control the temperature, we can control the light, we can control the nutrients. We have full control on how that food is grown, and we literally put this in an intervention area. So every time the children go into the intervention area, they're able to see the food growing in front of them. So we've got the allotment and we've got this inside school. We do have some children who like to go to the toilet more frequently than others to go and have a look at the food, such as tomatoes and chilies we've got growing in there. And if anybody would like any information, the company who supply this is Rethink Food. Nathan's email's there. Please do get in touch. The lights are bright, so maybe think about that. It does take a lot of time. So that's something else to think about. And obviously you're running electricity all day. So again, that's something else you might want to think about before inquiring. The quite expensive bits of kit, but this is kind of the future, and it's a different growing experience. And we need to show children about these different growing experiences. And again, that exposure to growing food. So what to grow? Well, first of all, get your children involved. What we do is in our food curricular scheme of work, year 4's plan what they're going to grow. They look at what's growing in this country. They look at the time frames of when they're grown. We work with our supplier, which is Grow Seed, who are an absolutely amazing company. You will get packets of seeds for 99p. But what I would say is, get the children involved with the planning and the growing calendar of what you're going to grow. Know your seed supplier, which again, Grow Seed is absolutely fantastic. But most of all, know your budget, know your space, and know your input. Are you going to grow stuff that needs a lot of input, but you've not got the time? Or are you going to grow stuff where you need loads of space? For example, we don't grow anything like broccoli or cauliflower or anything like that because we don't quite have the space for it, even though we've got 18 raised beds. We've got different things going in, as you can see in that bottom right hand corner there. We've got 6 different varieties of onions. We've got the carrots, the leeks, the potatoes, the beans. We grow all that. And know your purpose to grow as well. Are you going to grow it? So when we grow, we do it for multiple reasons. We grow the microgreens to garnish our dishes. We grow the main crop of vegetables so we can sell them So we sell veg boxes only £1, and that then makes it self-sufficient. So we're selling these veg boxes at £1 to the parents, and you know, you get quite a good quantity in there. They're being exposed to that fresh ingredients, but also they're giving us £1 back, and then that pound then enables us to pay for the seeds year after year after year, and then we're not spending any money. So you know what, you can't go to anyone and ask for money for X, Y, and Z, because you're already bringing that money in through your selling. And also, again, you're growing to sell. Last year we got some packs of tomatoes. We've got about 50 seeds. We planted them all up, 50 plants, £1 a plant, you know, because they're about 30 centimetres, good value really. And that's how we brought money in that way. So it's, you've got different ways of growing as well. And also, you know, we take these into the school, we cook with them, we grow with them, we taste them, we do all kinds of things with everything that we grow. And the children are fully involved in everything, even, you know, the selling, the planning, the weeding, everything. What about keeping animals? I've seen a few people on the comment section below saying, what about keeping animals? We have 6 rare breed hens at our school. It costs a little bit to obviously set up. We got that through grants. But this is another way of exposing children to where food comes from. And also we've got the rare breeds to add that extra element. It's important for us to teach children all about like these commercial breeds which are bred for high input, which is absolutely fine, but also these rare and heritage breeds that we have, and also giving them, the children, the reasons of why these breeds are going rare. So if we compare maybe the Aracuna, which is the grey one with its eyes covered, compared to a hybrid commercial brown, the Aracuna lays blue eggs, which many people might not want, and it also lays about 200 odd eggs a year compared to a hybrid, which obviously lays about 365 egg a day. So then if you're a farmer, are you going to pay for the animal that gives you an egg every day because the feed's the same, or are you going to pay for an animal that gives you an egg every other day? So it's about giving children that experience and that knowledge of why these things are happening. And again, we sell the eggs to the parents. The whole project is run by the children. They do all the feeding, they do all the cleaning out, they do the orders. I don't even do the orders. The children know when the food and when the bedding's stock's low, so they do all the orders. And it's getting them involved in real life situations to be able to give them that knowledge of food. So we sell it. So we've got, obviously you can see the brown, the white and the blue eggs. You know, we've got a good range, and the parents go absolutely mad for them because there's lots of range. And also, what about linking it to a farm? Well, we go to about 15 different farms. I work with about 15 different farms. Each one of my children in the whole school goes to a farm each year, and they go to a different farm each year. That means that they've got about, well, a couple of them go to 2 farms each year. So they've got about 13 different farms, different farming environments, different farming methods. So some might be caged hens, some might be free range hens, some might be an organic farm, so they can see the different farming methods. But it's also about them understanding why we have these farming methods in place. If we don't have the caged hens, that means that we can't sell eggs for cheap, for like £1. And also these organic eggs, well, it's really, really good, but then you need lots of land to be able to keep them. So it's exposing children to where that food comes from. It's exposing them to them knowing where it's grown and how it's produced. Because like we say, we've all got that story of the children giving a ridiculous answer of where a carrot comes from or where your eggs come from. And until we expose children to that situation, to know where it comes from, and maybe that's videos, but it mainly comes from real life situations like your gardening, your outdoor learning, your farm trips. And until we do that, we're really not going to see a change. We need to get them outside. We need to get them learning and hands on and seeing the carrot in the ground and seeing and collecting the eggs. Yeah, so yeah, it's really important we go on farm visits. Like I said, we work with 15. They're all free. So we work with the Country Trust to do that. They're free visits, but hold your horses, because farmer payment schemes are all in the air at the moment, so we'll have to see where we go. And on the right hand image we can see I took 10 children on a farm residential where we went and we worked and lived on the farm for a week. They're mainly children who struggle in the school setting, and we went there. We went to an organic farm in Cirencester, and we lived and worked there for a week. So it's really, really important we get the children outside and give them that full access to outside. And again, if you don't know where to grow or anything like that, then have a look at more practical ways of growing. Know your budget and things like that. And if anybody would like to get in touch with me or would like any more information, my Twitter is @primaryfooded. There you can see everything we do in our primary school for food, farming, cooking, education, outdoor learning, things like that. Or if you want to send me an email, it's primaryfooded@gmail.com.